We were talking a couple of weeks ago about, I don't know, when was the last time we had a great president? I mean, Trump did some really good things. And before him,
Reagan did some
good things. But the last, to me, truly great president was probably Calvin Coolidge. To me, he is, I don't know, definitely top 5. Maybe even top 3. Is he your favorite?
He's my favorite,
president?
far and away. Yeah.
It's Keith's favorite president. Keith's been talking about Calvin Coolidge for a long time. So we thought we'd get somebody on who could discuss Calvin Coolidge and remind us about some of the things that we're missing, especially today in light of everything that's going on. Jeff Deist joins us from the Mises Institute. Jeff, welcome to The Blaze.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. I have to say he's probably historians' least favorite president.
I know.
We all know why.
I know. He is so underrated and undervalued. Why is that?
Well, it's very simple because historians tend to run progressive, and progressives love this idea of a transformational president. Mm-hmm. And so this guy, who is an absolutely unheralded genius, gets stuck between two progressive icons, namely, obviously, FDR and Woodrow Wilson.
Right.
So God forbid we should have a decade of relative peace and prosperity without any great new deals or transformations. And so they hate this stuff. They want presidents to come in and act as basically kings and show us the way the world should be, rather than referees who are sort of over to the side making sure that America works right.
I mean, you could trace it back to his time as governor in Massachusetts, and even before that. I mean, the guy did great things while he was in whatever office he held. But to me, the start of his greatness was kind of in his vice president's role, when he and Harding got America out of the Depression of 1920. Did they not cut the federal budget by 50% in 2 years?
Absolutely remarkable. I mean, these numbers are laughable today.
Yeah,
We're talking about a federal budget of $5-6 billion. I mean, that's a sneeze over at the Pentagon or someplace today.
That's for sure.
But literally, I mean, we see the federal budget throughout the decade of the 20s go from about $6 billion down to below $3 billion.
It's amazing. That's amazing.
In the course of a decade. Now, I'm talking outlays.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, if you pan forward a little bit and you look at World War II, as we entered that war, we had about a $9 billion budget. And at the height of that in the 40s, we were up to about 90.
Wow.
So we had 10 times the growth. And then, of course, it scaled back after World War II, God bless them. But it didn't scale back to 9. It scaled back to about 30. So this is a remarkable – the 20s is a remarkable decade in America, and we ought to be studying it more.
Yeah, we went from the Depression of 1920 to what was referred to as the Roaring Twenties. And for some reason, people seem to look back with a negative viewpoint on the Roaring Twenties.
Well, first of all, this guy, I mean, constitutionally, in his personality, Calvin Coolidge just isn't an activist.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't want to run the world. He was renowned for sleeping 12 hours a day.
Really?
Which is a beautiful thing in a president. God help us. Step back.
Yeah.
But more importantly, he used to be, I'm not sure today we could have a president who is as silent or as, I guess, taciturn is the word. Some people think that the 1960 Nixon versus Kennedy debate, which was the first televised one, forever put us into this era of, telegenic or, type A presidents. And so could a guy like Calvin Coolidge get elected today? I think the answer is probably no.
No.
Right.
But his instinct, his sense was to not do something rather than do something. And he had the courage to say, business isn't this thing that's outside of society or, business is a part of America. Business is a big part of America. That's what makes America this sort of happy, prosperous place. And rather than demonizing it, why don't we look at it as something the government ought to foster? And, he had dealt with the Spanish flu in Massachusetts. He had argued against the League of Nations. This was a humble guy, and humility, man, oh man, and it's our fault in many ways. We want presidents today to be these omniscient people who can who know everything about healthcare and Afghanistan, and they know what's right for Anchorage, Alaska, and Miami, Florida, and it's absurd.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Calvin Coolidge would not have a Twitter account if he were around today.
He wouldn't use it much if he did.
You know, can I just ask a quick question, Jeff? One of the last things that Calvin Coolidge said, it was after FDR was elected, and he told a friend that he quote, "I feel I no longer fit in with these times." My gosh, if he thought that about like the impending FDR era, how would he react to what's going on in this country today?
Yeah, he said that, I believe, in 33. And that's, this is, I think every elderly generation starts to feel this. But, the pace of change is accelerating. There's no question about it. And this was a guy who, really viewed money and debt so differently than FDR. This was a guy who came out openly and said inflation is repudiation. Meaning that's literally a default by the U.S. government on its promise to savers, to old people, to holders of dollars in foreign governments, wherever they might be. And that's something else. The Federalist, if you guys know the Federalist website, they found a speech from Coolidge in the 1920s, which was just absolutely remarkable in terms of its humility and talking about how we ought to be a humble nation. We ought not to tell the rest of the world how to live their life. We ought to recognize that the rest of the world might have view things differently than us. And as I'm reading this or rereading this, I'm just thinking of Afghanistan and the 20 years we've been there. And I was thinking, my God, if we had had a little more foresight and a little less hubris, we might have a lot fewer problems over there.
Yeah, no question about it. Definitely a humble man. And isn't that in part why he didn't run for another term in 28? Was that? Yeah, in 1928, he decided, and he probably would have won another term, but he decided he didn't want to be a king, and he thought that was going to be spending a little too much time in office.
Well, he'd had that sort of partial term after Harding died suddenly.
Right.
So there was that. But
so
also,
it was about 6 years, right, that he was president?
But also, during his time in the White House, his son Calvin died, and it was a very
really
rough
weird
thing
way
psychologically. He was playing lawn tennis at the White House, visiting, stubbed his toe, had a growth on it, and back then, of course, this was simple staph infection. We didn't have penicillin. And when staph gets into your blood, it turns into sepsis. And so a week later, his 16-year-old was dead. And I don't think anybody ever really recovers from that psychologically.
No, and he certainly didn't.
So, I mean, this is a guy who was so quiet, the opposite of vain. And I like Trump. I'll be honest about that. But you look at Trump and you look at Biden. My God, who is this guy sort of robotically bumbling around into bushes and stuff? And I look at that and I think if that's the international avatar for the United States of America, you know what? In 22 or in 24, any candidate. I mean, we're beyond ideology, folks. Any candidate who just projects some degree of competence and some degree of optimism that America could be a place where people own stuff and have a house and maybe have a business and have some stocks, just this malaise. I mean, the Vietnam 2.0. Anybody who can project some kind of positive image or positive program for America, I think, is going to be giving Biden some trouble.
Yeah. How do you think he would handle the Afghanistan situation?
Well, you have to understand, these are people who are war weary. World War I was rough stuff for the United States. And let's not forget, something like 60% of Americans had at least some degree of German ancestry. This was not a popular war. This was kind of first cousins in some ways at the outset. And then Woodrow Wilson managed to sell that war. The first time ever that a war was fought, at least by the United States, ideologically to make the world safe for democracy, not over turf.
Right.
We weren't trying to annex France and Germany. So that was a very, very tough time for America, and I think the 20s were ripe for people to be home, to feel like they're focused on business and their families and having a little bit of fun. And so, that was a mass mobilization, a mass effort in the United States. Unfortunately, when we look at Afghanistan, that's affected so few of us directly. We haven't been invested. This isn't even like Vietnam, where half the kids on your street were over there. This has been something where we have this sort of mercenary military that's over there dealing with it, and we kind of forget about it. And now, of course, everyone's mouthing off on Facebook about Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And so it never felt like we were all invested in it. It felt like something far away. And, of course, they finance all this stuff with debt, so we don't feel it directly. They don't assess us all an additional $500 a month in taxes, because we all agree we got to fight in Afghanistan. So it's just such a different America. I mean,
really is.
It wasn't until after World War II that we really felt, I think, like a superpower.
So, as a Mises Institute historian, where would Jeff Deist place Calvin Coolidge on the pantheon of American presidents?
Boy, it's in terms of modern presidents, absolutely number one.
Yeah.
And I would consider modern meaning after.
So after the founding fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would make him number one. And this is a guy who is grappling with an America, that's growing and changing. And just the idea that the federal government ought to be a minor, reticent player in the story of America has been so utterly lost since then. Mm-hmm. That I wish someone could tell that story. Amity Schlaze is a great historian. She runs the Calvin Coolidge Foundation up in Vermont. And she honestly thinks that there's another Coolidge out there. And I hope,
really?
Man, do I hope she's right. Yeah.
Me too.
Does she have a name?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is social media forces these people, I think, into uncomfortable roles. I mean,
yeah, very true.
Like a Ted Cruz. He apparently a brilliant guy at Harvard Law.
Yeah.
By all accounts, a brilliant law student, but yet the world we're in forces this celebrity status on politicians, and I think it's up to us, I guess, to reward one of them with the courage not to be a celebrity.
All right, Jeff, appreciate it. Fascinating stuff. If people wanted to read and see more, where would they go? Mises.org?
Yeah, just go to Mises.org, MISES.org, or follow me on Twitter at Jeff Deist.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff.
And I just think, thank you. I think it's just beautiful historic poetry that Calvin Coolidge's birthday is July 4th.
Yeah, that's great.
How cool is that? Huh?
Awesome.